Let me tell you something about the people who carry weight you cannot see. In every room, there are those who've been through storms that left no visible scars. They smile, they function, they show up. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll notice something different in their eyes. A depth that wasn't there before. A quietness that speaks louder than words. These are the people who've gone through too much. And here's what most don't understand about them. They're not broken. They're rebuilt, piece by piece, in the darkness, when no one was watching. When someone goes through too much, something fundamental shifts inside them. They develop what psychologists call a heightened sensitivity to suffering. Not just their own, but everyone's. They can sense pain in a room before it's mentioned. They notice the person sitting alone at the party. They hear the tremor in your voice when you say you're fine. Because they've been there. In that space where fine is just a shield you carry to protect others from your truth. That's the first layer of their psychology. Empathy that runs deeper than sympathy. Soul recognizing soul. But there's something else that happens. You stop fearing certain things that terrify everyone else. Rejection. They've survived worse. Failure. They've rebuilt from rubble. Judgment. They've already been their own harshest critic. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. The idea that profound struggle can actually expand your psychological capacity. These people have stared into the void and realized they're stronger than they thought. They've learned that rock bottom has a foundation, and once you've touched it, you carry a different kind of strength. Not the loud, performative kind. The quiet, unshakable kind. Here's what's fascinating. People who've been through too much develop a compressed sense of time. They don't take moments for granted anymore. When they're with you, they're fully there. When they laugh, it's genuine. When they say I love you, they mean it with every fiber. Because they know how quickly everything can change, how a single phone call can divide your life into before and after. So they hold their moments differently, more gently, more intentionally. But let's be honest about the shadows. There are parts of them that stay guarded. Walls built not from coldness, but from survival. Trust doesn't come easy. Vulnerability feels like a luxury they can't always afford. Because when you've had your trust shattered, opening up again feels like handing someone a weapon and hoping they won't use it. So they move carefully. They test the waters before diving in, and some people mistake that caution for distance. But it's not distance. It's wisdom earned through fire. They often live with one foot in readiness. They have backup plans. They imagine worst-case scenarios not to torture themselves, but to never be blindsided again. Because being blindsided once was enough. While others might see this as anxiety, for them it's armor. It's how they maintain control in a world that once felt wildly out of control. Here's where it gets beautiful. Despite everything they've endured, many of these people become the softest versions of themselves. Not weak, soft. There's a difference. They know what it's like to need gentleness and not receive it. So they give it freely. They're the ones who check in on you when everyone else forgets. They're the ones who sit with you in silence when words feel empty. Their pain didn't harden them. It opened them. The people who've been hurt the most are often the ones who hurt others the least. True resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were before. That's a myth. It's about integrating what happened into who you're becoming. People who've gone through too much carry their past not as a burden, but as proof. Proof that they survived. Proof that they can endure. And that knowledge becomes their anchor. When the next storm comes, they don't panic. They've weathered worse. But there's the loneliness. People who've been through too much often feel profoundly alone, even in crowded rooms. Their experiences have taken them to places most people haven't been. They've seen things, felt things, survived things that don't translate into casual conversation. so they stay quiet about it. That gap between their reality and everyone else's can feel isolating. Finding someone who speaks their language, that's rare, that's precious. When you've lost everything, or nearly everything, you realize what actually matters. Material things lose their grip. Status feels hollow. What rises to the surface is connection, meaning, purpose, love. These people don't chase what's shiny. They chase what's real. They value the friend who shows up over the one who's popular. They value depth over surface, because they've learned the hard way that everything else is just noise. Here's the truth. Many people who've been through too much don't want your pity. They want your presence. They don't need you to fix them. They've already done the work of putting themselves back together, often alone, often in the dark. What they need is to be seen, not as victims, but as survivors. Not as broken, but as beautifully complex human beings who carry stories that shaped them. People who've been through trauma often develop incredibly high emotional granularity. They don't just feel sad, they can distinguish between grief, melancholy, disappointment, and longing. This precision comes from having to navigate complex emotional landscapes just to survive. They can read a room like a book. They notice what's unsaid. They feel what's hidden. But this sensitivity is a double-edged sword. When you feel everything so deeply, you also hurt more intensely. A small rejection can trigger old wounds. Their emotional immune system is both stronger and more reactive. So they might seem to overreact to things that seem small to you. But what you're seeing isn't an overreaction. It's their nervous system doing what it was trained to do. Protect at all costs. Those who've been through too much have an unusual relationship with hope. They're not naive optimists. They can't afford to be. But they're not pessimists either. They exist in this beautiful space where they hope for the best while being prepared for the worst. They want to believe in good things, in people, in possibilities. But they've been disappointed enough times to hold their hope carefully, like a flame in the wind. This isn't cynicism, it's survival optimism, hope tempered by reality. And there's a quiet strength in choosing to hope anyway. In choosing to try again, in choosing to open your heart even when you know it might break. Because that's what people who've been through too much ultimately do. They choose, every single day. They choose to get up. They choose to keep going. They choose to believe that their pain wasn't pointless, that it taught them something, that it made them who they needed to become. Not that they survived, but that they chose to keep living. They carry their past with them, not as a weight, but as a map. It tells them where the pitfalls are, where the dangers hide, what red flags look like. And yes, sometimes that means they see threats that aren't there. But more often, it means they're wise, they're discerning. They don't make the same mistakes twice. When you encounter someone who's been through too much, understand that what you're seeing is just the surface. Beneath it is an entire ecosystem of coping mechanisms, defense strategies, and survival instincts. They're doing their best, they're functioning, they're showing up. And that alone is remarkable. Because there were days when showing up felt impossible. There were moments when they weren't sure they'd make it. But they did. People who've been through too much often become the most compassionate leaders, the most empathetic friends, the most understanding partners. Their pain didn't close them off from the world. It opened them to it. They use their scars as credentials to help others who are hurting. They turn their mess into their message. And in doing so, they prove that suffering doesn't have to be meaningless, that it can be transformed into purpose. So the next time you meet someone who's been through too much, remember this. They're not looking for pity. They're not weak. They're warriors who fought battles you never saw. They're survivors who rebuilt themselves in the dark. They're humans who chose hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over bitterness. And maybe their quiet strength will remind you that we're all more resilient than we know. That going through too much doesn't break you. It reveals you. And sometimes, in the breaking and rebuilding, we discover who we were meant to be all along. Because in the end, the people who've been through too much aren't defined by what happened to them. They're defined by what they chose to do with it, how they chose to rise, how they chose to love, how they chose to live fully and deeply, despite everything. And that's not just psychology. That's the human spirit at its most beautiful. Scarred, yes. Tired, yes. But undefeated. Always undefeated.